Hi, this is History with Andrew Allen, and today is episode 3 of the Cathar Crusade, The Rise of Simon de Montfort. Before I forget, I include the names of the people I talk about and my sources in the description. As I explained in part 2, Pope Innocent III had failed to persuade the residents of the Languedoc region in southern France to reject the Cathar belief. It seemed that Innocent would have to accept the existence of a different interpretation of Christianity until Peter of Cassel, one of his legates, was murdered on January 14th, 1208. Despite the lack of evidence of Cathar involvement, Innocent promptly made Peter of Cassel a saint and declared a crusade, promising cancellation of temporal punishments for sins in exchange for a mere 40 days' service. Still, the sizable Crusader army seemed unlikely to accomplish much in 40 days. To everyone's surprise, the town of Beziers was captured in a single afternoon of slaughter, and Carcassonne, stronghold of the Viscount of Beziers, surrendered after it lost its water supply. Having accomplished much more than they expected, the original leaders of the crusade returned home, so Simon de Montfort was given command of the Crusader army and made Viscount of Beziers. So, who was Simon de Montfort? The Montfort estates were small, and although he married into the more powerful Montmorency family, he gained little wealth aside from a trusted partner. When his maternal uncle, the Earl of Leicester, died in 1204 without an heir, he inherited the title. But he never received a penny from the estates because those estates were in England, and King John of England and King Philip of France were at war with each other. Possessing an unyielding moral character, Montfort had refused to accompany the main Crusader army when its leaders decided to attack Byzantium during the Fourth Crusade. Instead, he led a few knights to fight in Palestine, which is where they were supposed to go, and which used up what was left of his fortune. Utterly devoted to relatives, friends, and followers, Montfort was ruthless towards his enemies. Motivated by a fervent but heartless faith, he seemed to have regretted none of the destruction caused by the crusade. It is important to point out that the Cathar Crusade reflected a dramatic shift in the papacy's attitude towards heresy. Pope Innocent III had decreed that heretics would be punished and blessed any nobles who carried out a land grab on a lord not sufficiently aggressive in performing the punishment. As a result, the crusade was a heaven-sent opportunity for northern lords with few prospects. Many of Montfort's most devoted followers were knights with even less wealth and opportunity than him. Hard, desperate men, often second sons, they had little to lose and would risk anything to gain land and status. Many Cathars fled to Montségur, a castle in the Pyrenees that had been rebuilt in 1204 by a wealthy Cathar related to the local rulers, urged on by Cathar leaders who saw the need for a refuge. Some sought sanctuary with Raymond-Roger-Count of Foix, who was related to female perfects and had signed a year-long truce with Montfort. The residents of the Languedoc must have been shocked by the sudden disruption of a power structure that had existed for centuries, but they likely consoled themselves with the thought that the northern interloper would not last long. This optimism was justified since many of the local lords who had submitted after the sack of Beziers changed their minds once the main Crusader army had left. In particular, the King of Aragon's refusal to accept Montfort as a vassal drove numerous local lords to break their vows of fealty to Montfort, which should not be a surprise since he was an outsider with few connections to the region. While the setbacks were daunting, Montfort still held several key urban centers and he had the Pope's support. So more priests were sent to northern France to preach hatred against non-violent believers with a different interpretation of Christianity, which produced a steady stream of recruits during the spring of 1210. Since crusaders for the Cathar Crusade were only required to serve for 40 days to receive indulgences, crusading season occurred during late spring and summer when the roads were easiest to travel and before the essential harvest system. Although on a map the various castles and towns seemed close to each other, that ignores the twisting, narrow roads and mountains. Aside from the attraction of indulgence of sins, many knights, especially younger knights, began to view a tour with Montfort as an advanced course in warfare, superior even to tournaments. The entire process, including travel there and back, only took 2 months, enough time to sharpen one's skills on the battlefield and learn the intricacies of sieges and crushing popular resistance without having to worry about ambitious rivals causing trouble in one's absence. This masterclass in warfare was invaluable, since the opportunities for conflict had fallen dramatically after the conquest of the Angevin lands in France in 1204. How did Montfort commence the conquest of the rest of the Languedoc? Tired of his men being ambushed by the local lords, he responded with a terrifying savagery. After capturing the small town of Bram in early April, he took revenge for 2 of his knights who had been blinded the previous fall by blinding 100 male prisoners, cutting off their noses and upper lips, leaving one of them a single eye to guide them as they walked to another town. While the mass blinding at Bram spread terror, it also drove some southerners to mutilate crusaders in revenge. Since Toulouse was preoccupied with internal strife, Foix had accepted a truce, and Count Raymond was unwilling to embrace war, Montfort faced no serious opposition, allowing him to focus on Menev, a key Cathar sanctuary. On June 15, 1210, Montfort appeared with his army in front of the mountaintop town, which could only be reached by a single road surrounded by cliffs. Although his 3 catapults steadily pounded the walls, it appeared that the summer heat would drive away the Crusaders before they could break through the walls. However, Montfort and his allies had spent what little money they had to finance the construction of a huge trebuchet, cutting-edge military technology operated by well-paid specialists, called La Malvoisine, the evil neighbor. It began operation in late June. The trebuchet was much more powerful than catapults, and more important, able to hit a target with precision, hammering a single spot on a wall. The Crusaders targeted the walled staircase that protected the residents while they brought water from the city's wells located on the floor of the canyon. Once the staircase was destroyed, the catapults and the trebuchet spent July pounding the city until William of Minerve negotiated a surprisingly fair settlement. His people would be spared, and he would retain a small portion of his lands, while Montfort would get everything else. Not the best result possible, but acceptable, until Papal Legate Amaury arrived and added a minor clause. Every resident had to swear allegiance to the church and reject any heresy. As expected, only 3 of the 140 perfects complied, so the rest were burned on July 22nd, the feast of St. Mary Magdalene. The wholesale slaughter of innocents is easier to understand when you realize that the zealous abbot Bernard of Clairvaux had declared that the killing of heathens and heretics was not homicide, but malicide, the killing of evil. Since it was an act of cleansing, they were often burned. Having crushed the Tronquevel family and the city of Minerve, the Crusaders set their sights on Toulouse. Count Raymond had already been excommunicated again in September 1209, but Amaury raised the stakes by excommunicating the civil government of Toulouse and placing the city under interdict. The councils decided to go over the legate's head and traveled to Rome to lobby the Pope. By this time, Innocent was at the height of his power. His clan had driven the other clans of Rome into submission. 4 of his relatives had been named cardinals, and the stretch of central Italy, lusted after by German emperors, was once again firmly under papal control, paying a rich annual tribute. His predecessors had been dependent on French and English kings to survive the aggression of the German emperor. Now he was the supreme legal authority in Europe. Even his rival Christian authority in Constantinople had been deposed by the Fourth Crusade. However, Count Raymond and the consuls of Toulouse were a potent combination, so the Pope lifted the interdict and told his legates to arrange a trial for the Count in the spring. Meanwhile, emboldened by Montfort's success, Bishop Fulk of Toulouse moved against the Jews and the heretics who operated openly in the tolerant city of Toulouse. Relying on the traditional complaint against Jews, Fulk preached against the evil of charging interest on loans, but was ignored since loans were vital in a commercial center like Toulouse, and the sale of shares had become common to finance large-scale projects. Unlike the established church, Cathars did not care about usury. While people found it laughable that Fulk preached against the pursuit of wealth when the church diligently collected its tithe. However, not everyone had benefited from this new economy, and they embraced Fulk's sermons. Focusing his attack on the merchants, the lenders, and the godless, he formed his recruits into the White Brotherhood, who wore a white cross on dark robes and attacked the homes of Jews and Cathars. Its members were entitled to the indulgences of the Crusade, and they eagerly hunted heretics, often using it as an excuse to smash the shops of usurers. Their victims formed the Black Brotherhood in self-defense, and clashes between the two sides produced numerous deaths. Angered by the peaceful tolerance of Toulouse, Fulk had succeeded in ending it. While Fulk was slowly poisoning the city, Count Raymond knew that Montfort was the greatest threat. So, while Montfort was blinding men at Bram and laying siege to Minerve, Raymond rode around his domains making peace with church officials, paying reparations, or tearing down castles when necessary. It was a humiliating process, but it would prove worthwhile if the papal conclave restored him to the loving embrace of the church. Raymond desperately needed a victory since he had few allies. The Tronqueville family no longer existed, the population of Beziers was dead, Carcassonne had become Montfort's headquarters, civil war was brewing in Toulouse, and Minerve had just fallen when the conclave convened in July 1210. Only Raymond-Roger of Foix and Pedro of Aragon supported him. While the Pope had consented to allow Raymond to defend himself, the Catholic hierarchy in the Languedoc sought only complete victory. Therefore, Amaury spoke first and stated that Count Raymond had not carried out all of the terms of his penance. Since he had lied before, he should not be trusted now, and should not be permitted to speak. The members of the conclave accepted the perjury argument and extended the sentence of excommunication without hearing a single word from Raymond. The Pope may have had some misgivings, but did not oppose the decision. Raymond spent several months attempting to gain a hearing, but no one could meet with an excommunicate. He promised more concessions, but his oaths could not be accepted, since he was an excommunicate, and he could not have a hearing since he had been declared a perjurer. It was an ingenious and effective strategy. While Raymond was knocking on doors that remained closed, Montfort gained another victory, capturing Thame. The Crusader army was large, but Thame had a strong garrison with a wealth of supplies and was led by Raymond of Thame, who had successfully maintained his independence against the Counts of Toulouse and the Tronqueville family. The castle had been considered too steep to be assaulted, but Montfort led his hardened followers to scramble up the slope. A Paris priest and siege engineer named William ensured the accuracy of the catapults, and Montfort's wife Alice oversaw the arrival of reinforcements who were guided through the dangerous terrain to the attacker's position. The professional siege equipment gradually wore down the walls. 4 months later, the defenders were battling dysentery, and most of the garrison tried to escape on the night of November 22nd. Thame had fallen, and the dungeons of Carcassonne had a new resident. Raymond died there 3 years later. These victories sparked further capitulations. Even Peter Roger of Cabaret surrendered his lands and titles in exchange for lenient treatment. Hoping to contain the crusade, Pedro of Aragon accepted Montfort as a vassal in January 1211, thus depriving the young Tronqueville heir of his inheritance and legitimizing the church's power to disregard his authority in the region. In exchange, he wanted his brother-in-law, Count Raymond, readmitted to society. Pedro proved to be an incompetent negotiator, giving the church what it wanted before receiving what he wanted. Amaury held a council on February 4th at Montpellier, and he showed his power by having the king and the count wait outside the church while the council debated. Undoubtedly, they expected a steep price, but Amaury surpassed expectations. The document listing the final demands of the council was divided into two parts. The first part repeated the original demands. Stop employing mercenaries, pay the clergy their tithe, do not tax the clergy, stop employing Jews, and hand over all heretics in his domains to the Crusaders within a year. Nothing new. The second part made it clear that the church wanted complete submission. All castles and fortresses in the Languedoc would be demolished. People could only eat meat once a week. Everyone would wear coarse robes, and the nobles would have to leave their homes, handing over everything they owned to the Crusaders. Finally, Raymond would be exiled to Palestine. Once the document had been read to him, Raymond accepted that it would be war to the death. As Amaury had undoubtedly planned, Raymond was excommunicated 2 days later, and his lands were placed under interdict, which was approved by Innocent, who was preoccupied with a German invasion of the Papal States, conflict with the Portuguese and English kings, and a Muslim invasion of Spain. Fortunately, the Count of Foix truce ended soon after, and he allied with the Count. I will discuss how Count Raymond fought back against the Crusaders in the next episode. Thanks for listening.